Welcome to Cracklin' Rosie True Crime, Son of Sam Series Part 2, The Killing Spree. In Part 1, The Birth of a Serial Killer, we discuss the early years of David Berkowitz. Today, we will be walking through the timeline of the killing spree. Welcome back to Cracklin' Rosie True Crime. We're going to cover quickly the timeline between 1971 and 1974. We will talk a little bit about David Berkowitz in the military and just prior to the killing spree, and then we will move on to the actual events of the killing spree. So what we know, in 1971, David Berkowitz graduated Christopher Columbus High School. So before we move on from that, something to think about. He had so many claimed psychological issues, but it didn't seem to affect his graduating from high school. So that speaks volumes. As a girl who grew up in the boroughs of New York, usually people who had problems as a youth, either they had to do summer schools or they either dropped out of high school or, had problems, were left back, that sort of thing. But it didn't seem to, all of the events that David claims and all of the circumstances that he claims didn't seem to affect that. So just a quick thing to think about. So after his graduation, shortly thereafter, he enlists in the U.S. Army. And according to David's accounts, his father, his adoptive dad, Nathan, had tried to encourage him to attend college, which he did later on, but at the time, David just wasn't into it. He wanted a change. He didn't know what he would major in college, and he says that he just wanted a new adventure. He had a fascination with the Vietnam War and really wanted to enlist in the Army, and that's what he did. In June of 1971, he enlists. He's stationed at Fort Knox. July 1971, he passes his physical exams and his psychological evaluations. Now, the hat honoring my father and my brother, who were both in the U.S. Army. My dad was in the U.S. Army. He was in the Air Force. I mean, I can go on for days on his military career, but this isn't about him. But that's why the hat. Not because of David Berkowitz. No. But anyhow, let's jump back to that. I was not a military veteran, just a brat. How extensive and intense are the psychological evaluations? Let's think about that. If he had all of the problems that he claims that he did and that were sensationalized in all of the reportings, he didn't have a problem passing the psychological evaluations for the service. So drop it in chat, drop your thoughts. Okay, so I'm assuming that in Fort Knox is where he did his boot camp and his preparation, and then shortly thereafter he was he was stationed in South Korea. There's not too much about his military career. I was able to dig up some quick facts from Grunge and just some other articles, but there's not that much available, at least that I was able to find. So let's see. I've got notes today So his military records show that he served as an infantryman. His rank was Specialist E4. His primary skill was rifleman, qualifying as a sharpshooter, okay, with an M16 rifle. Okay. Some of the crimes were executed very cleanly, and some were very sloppy. So, discuss. Throw it in the chat. He earned 2 standard medals of service. One was the National Defense Service Medal and the other the Armed Forces Expeditionary Medal. He had few infractions in South Korea. He says that they were related to drugs and LSD use, and could be. I don't see why he would lie about experimenting with drugs, and it would totally make sense. It was very common. I guess he missed a truck convoy that he was assigned to, and he also had an overnight MIA. So his rank was dropped for a period of time to E3. He got a fine. He blamed it on drugs. And then he went back to Fort Knox, where it seems he cleaned up his act, and he was honorably discharged June of 1974. So that's about all we're going to cover on that. Just really briefly, from 74 to 75, after his discharge, he's back in Yonkers. He takes on some various blue-collar jobs. He was a cab driver, which scares the pants off of me. He was a security guard, I believe, at JFK Airport, and he also was a letter sorter at the USPS, the United States Post Office, for those of you out of the country who may not know that. So it's during this time that Berkowitz claims he met up with the Carr brothers and was associated with various other people who were part of a local cult. We're not going to go deep diving into that right now. I'm just throwing it out there. Feel free. Any information that you may have that you want to share, throw it in the comments or the chat. We will go deeper on another video on who the Carr family was and his relationship to them. Kind of pin some things together there, but we're just going to touch on it right now. So these are just a few years prior to the killing spree. So I'm going to be back in just a few moments, and we will discuss the actual crimes, the timeline of events, and how they were reported to have gone down. So thank you for taking those few minutes to honor and acknowledge all of those impacted by these horrific crimes. So at this time, I've got my notes together, I've got my glasses so that I can see. I'm going to be following the structure from this Crime Museum article. I don't want to get anything wrong out of respect to the victims. So, the killing spree. According to his own accounts, Berkowitz's killing career began on December 24th, 1975, when he stabbed 2 women using a hunting knife. One of the women was Michelle Foreman, and the other was never identified. So I tried to dig a little bit deeper into these stabbings. Neither died. The unidentified victim we don't know of. So it's assumed that there were superficial wounds or no wounds at all, because there was no hospital report of her that could be found, nor was there a police report. Now, on Michelle Foreman, I was able to find out that she was a 15-year-old high school student, and she had been walking by a bridge when David Berkowitz attacked. Of course, at the time, these weren't linked. There was no Son of Sam yet. Okay, in the early morning hours of July 29, 1976, 18-year-old Donna Lauria and 19-year-old Jody Valenti were sitting in Valenti's car when Berkowitz walked up to the car and shot them. He fired 3 shots and walked away. Lauria was killed instantly, and Valenti survived. When Valenti was questioned by police, he stated that she did not recognize him and gave a description which fit a statement by Lauria's father, who said that he saw the same man sitting in a yellow car. Pay attention to that. Testimony by other individuals in the neighborhood stated that the yellow car had been seen driving around the neighborhood that night. Police determined that the gun used was a .44 caliber Bulldog. So we have some forensics there. We have the sighting of a yellow car, and we have Valenti, who survived, saying she didn't know the guy, but evidently she gave description. So let's go down to October 23rd, 1976. Berkowitz struck again, this time in Flushing, and Flushing is in Queens. So we're going right here. And basically, Flushing is a community in the borough of Queens, which I just told you. Carl DeNaro and Rosemary Keenan were sitting in their car parked when the window shattered. Keenan immediately started the car and drove off. It was not until they got help that they realized that they had been shot at, even though DeNaro had a bullet wound in his head. Both DeNaro and Keenan survived the attack, and neither saw the shooter. Police determined that the bullets were .44 caliber, but could not determine what gun they came from. Investigators did not initially draw a connection between this shooting and the previous one because they occurred in 2 separate New York boroughs. So the first shooting, the first 2 incidents were in the Bronx, including the stabbing, or the stabbings. Now, before we just move on and rattle off dates, I would like you to know that Carl DeNaro is still very much involved in the scene, and he's written a book, The Son of Sam and Me, which I'm still working through, and I definitely recommend it. So I don't have permission to discuss him, so I won't go too deep, but I will let you know that you can look him up. Just type his name on a search or in YouTube, and you could see some pretty cool interview footage of him and his feelings on the case. You know, he was affected his whole life by this case, and he is of the belief that others were involved, and there is much, much, much more to this case than the original narrative. But that's all I'll say out of respect for Carl, but pick up his book. It's available on Amazon. Okay, so we're moving on to midnight, November 17th. 16-year-old Donna DeMasi and 18-year-old Joanne Lomino were sitting on Lomino's porch in Belrose, Queens. As they talked, a man approached them dressed in military fatigues. He began to ask them for directions in a high-pitched voice before taking out a revolver and shooting them. They both fell, injured, and the shooter ran away. Both girls survived their wounds, but I'm saying Lamino, but I heard it say Lomino, so I hope that I'm not saying it wrong. It looks more like Lamino to me. Correct me in chat if I'm wrong, please. Lamino was paralyzed. Police were able to determine that the bullets were from an unknown .44 caliber gun. They were also able to make composite sketches based on testimony from the girls and the neighborhood witnesses. So again, I'm just giving you the dates and facts in chronological order. We are going to go into a study discussion on another video about these composite sketches, about what you will learn in a few moments about notes left, and about how it starts connecting together. So the first few incidents were not yet linked until they started saying, oh, hey, there's another one using, .44 caliber pistol. So they started linking at this point. So at the time of the stabbings and the first incident, and then the incident in Queens with Rosemary Keenan and Carl Zanaro, they weren't linked yet. And as a matter of fact, in the Keenan-Zanaro incident, the police were initially under the suspect or thinking that it was a drug bust or some sort that went wrong. Again, read the book. Okay. So I don't want to just skim over these. I want to give you the facts, but I do want to give you a little bit of commentary. I have seen a few videos let me just jump back a little bit, where you can hear Donna Laurio's father speak, interviewed quite a few actually, older and some more recent. So definitely check that out. Remember, this is fact discussion so that it's encouraging everyone to go out and pick. There are many rabbit holes that you can fall into and try to dig yourself out, and you find yourself on these different paths with this case. I mean, it's enormous. My advice to you is pick and choose your stance once you've done some research, and then pick and choose which holes you want to dive into, okay? Because it's endless. Okay. So we're now on to January 30th, 1977. Christine Fron and Joe Deal, please correct me. I think that that's important. Were sitting in Deal's car in Queens when the car was shot at. Deal suffered minor injuries and Fron died of injuries at the hospital. Neither victim ever saw the shooter. After this shooting, police publicly connected this case with the previous shootings. They observed that all shootings involved the .44 caliber gun, and the shooters seemed to target young women with long dark hair. We'll talk about that. When the composite sketches from the various attacks were released, NYPD officials noted they were likely searching for multiple shooters. Okay. So if you've seen, by now you've probably seen the composite sketches. I included them, maybe not in this video, I'm sorry. I think that I included them in the study section, where we look at the notes left and the sketches and the differences. But here, it was said at that time, again, I was a little girl, I was 9 and 10 in 76 to 78, let's say 10. I do remember that was the sensationalized story. The Son of Sam is looking for brown-haired girls with, long past shoulder length hair, and people were cutting their hair. But after the research that I've done, I really believe that was all nonsense. It was just the newspapers sensationalizing. It was coincidence. As you can see, there were men attacked. So it's in this because that's the way it was reported, but I wouldn't pay a whole lot of attention to that. But you make up your own mind. We're all entitled to our own opinion. And then again, keep in mind, NYPD, which for those of you out of the country, that's just New York Police Department. Officials noted that they were likely searching for multiple shooters because the pictures looked different. We will talk about that again in our study groups. And by the way, I do have several study videos prepared already that are going to be coming out in the next 2 weeks, but I wanted this information to come out first. So we wanted to cover the timeline in part 2, and then the rest of this series will be in short videos where we deep dive into little pieces of what we know so far. And I know a lot of you are out there that know a lot at this point, but this assumes that you're learning about the case and you're making up your mind of where you stand and what you think may have occurred. On March 8, 1977, Columbia University student Virginia Voskerichian was shot walking home from class. She lived just 1 block away from fellow victim Christine Fraun. She was shot several times and eventually died of a gunshot wound to the head. In the minutes following the shooting, a neighbor who heard the shooting went outside and saw what he described as a short, husky teenage boy sprinting from the crime scene. Other neighbors reported seeing the teenager as well as a man matching Berkowitz's description in the area of the shooting. The earliest media coverage implied that the teenager was the perpetrator. Eventually, police officials determined that the teenager was a witness and not a suspect. So we're going January 30th and March 8th. So as you can see here, very close to one another, and David Berkowitz would be up here. So if he had, well, it is of my opinion that he absolutely did not work alone, okay? But I want you to make up your opinion. When we're discussing facts, I don't like to throw too much opinion around because then you might become biased. But to his account, he didn't work alone. I have heard on interviews people affected. I hate to use the word victims because I hear that they really hate that, and I agree. But there are even some survivors, let's say survivors like that are of the belief that he did not work alone. So it's something to consider. All right, so we're going to move on. This is one of the notes that were left at the crime scene. Again, in our study session, I'm going to show you all of the notes that I was able to obtain, and we could read them, we could try and analyze them, we could just talk about them quickly. I mean, they're kind of insane, so I don't know that sitting around analyzing them. I think the most important thing is to really look at the handwriting and the style, the slant of the handwriting, and then how much they differ. Okay. On April 17, 1977, Alexander Esau and Valentina Suriani were in the Bronx, several blocks away from the scene of the Valenti Lauria shooting. The pair were each shot twice while sitting in a car, and both died before they could talk to police. Investigators determined that they were killed by the same suspect in the other shootings, with the same .44 caliber firearm. At the crime scene, police discovered a handwritten note addressed to the captain of the NYPD. In this letter, Berkowitz referred to himself as the son of Sam and expressed his desire to continue his shooting sprees. So this is the bottom part of it. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's a 3 or 4 little page letter that I downloaded, and this is the one that he left to the captain of NYPD. Again, we'll talk about that in greater detail. So I'm going to skip over this because we're going to also cover the manhunt and the discrepancies and all that stuff deeper. So I don't want to just read off of this when I have a different narrative. Okay. On June 26, 1977, the son of Sam made another appearance in Bayside, Queens. Sal Lupo and Judy Placido were sitting in their car in the early morning hours when they were shot with 3 gunshots. They both suffered minor injuries and survived, though neither saw the attacker. So, you know, we've got witnesses, very, very few. We've got people, you know, it happening so fast that they're not, they don't see their attacker well enough to really, you know, give much description. But anyway, for Sal and Judy, there were witnesses that reported seeing a tall, stocky man with dark hair fleeing the crime scene, as well as a blonde man with a mustache driving in the area. Police believed that the dark man was their suspect, the dark-haired man was the suspect, and the blonde man was a witness. On July 31st, 1977, just 2 days after the anniversary of the first shooting, Berkowitz shot again, as reported. This time in Brooklyn, and we're down here now in the Bath Avenue area of Brooklyn. You know, that's really far. But I'm not saying he wasn't involved, because to his own account, he was present and witnessed all of the shootings. I'm saying that he may not have been, or in my opinion, was not the shooter in all of the incidents. Okay. Stacy Moskowitz and Robert Violante were in Violante's car, parked near a park, when a man walked up to the passenger side and began shooting. Moskowitz died at the hospital, and Violante suffered non-life-threatening injuries. Unlike most of the other female victims, Moskowitz did not have long or dark hair. There were several witnesses to this shooting who were able to provide descriptions of the shooter to the police. One of the witnesses described that the man looked like he was wearing a wig, which could account for the varying descriptions of suspects with blonde and with blonde and dark hair. Several witnesses saw a man matching Berkowitz's description, wearing a wig, driving a yellow car without any headlights, and speeding away from the crime scene. Police decided to investigate the owners of any yellow cars matching the description. David Berkowitz's car was one of those cars, but investigators initially pegged him as a witness rather than a suspect. Now, in pictures that I've seen of David Berkowitz's car, it's more like a beige, like a long beige car, but there's been talk about a yellow Volkswagen. Again, we're coming back to the details. Right now, the in between the line details. Right now, I'd like to finish this part. So, from what I could remember as a young girl, the Stacy Moskowitz one was the one that I heard of most, and I'm sure it was because it being in the borough of Brooklyn, and that's where I'm from. So I'm sure that that's why we got more local press on it. Plus, they were making a big deal because you go back and look at pictures, she was just a very beautiful young woman with blonde hair, and so they were making this big differential that, oh, everyone had brown and this one was blonde. But again, I really don't think that the hair color is of much importance. So for me, I don't feed off of that. So we're going to get into a little bit of description when we talk about the Carr family. There was some dialogue between local police, between dispatch, and between witnesses that we're going to dive a little deeper on the next video, or the subsequent video from that. Yeah, we're doing letters, and it may end up being all together, but we're doing study, and we're going to dive deeper into that. So I'm not going to dive into it right now. I'm just going to continue going on with this original narrative here. So On August 10th, 1977, police searched Berkowitz's car. Inside, they found a rifle, a duffel bag filled with ammunition, maps of the crime scenes, and in an unsent Son of Sam letter addressed to Sergeant Dowd of the Omega Task Force. So by this time, I skipped over that before, they had already had like a 300 uniformed task force on the hunt for David Berkowitz, because if you're not from New York, New York is busy, especially in the boroughs and in the city area. It is busy. And, you just can't have a serial killer running all over town. And that was the way the press was making it out, that he was hunting down, women of certain, with certain attributes, and everybody was scared. And they don't mention this here, but at the time, we had a blackout in the area, and that blackout lasted, I think it was like 2.5 or 3 days. So now you've got looting going on, you've got no power, you've got a blackout going on, and you've got a serial killer loose. So that was what was going on. That was what the atmosphere was like. Okay, where was I? Here we go. Sorry, I went off on a tangent. Police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave his apartment. So they were tipped off. They were tipped off. And again, we're going to go deeper into that. One of the relatives of his posse was involved in that. So let's see. Police decided to wait for Berkowitz to leave his apartment, hopefully with enough time to obtain a warrant, as they had searched his car without one. The warrant never arrived, but police surrounded Berkowitz when he left his apartment, holding a .44 Bulldog in a paper bag. When Berkowitz was arrested, he allegedly told police, "Well, you got me. How come it took you so long, or such a long time?" And he said that that's nonsense, that again, that was the papers sensationalizing the story. He said that he was respectful to police and that he never said that. When police searched Berkowitz's apartment, they found satanic graffiti drawn on the walls and diaries detailing his alleged 1,400 arsons in the New York area. When Berkowitz was taken in for questioning, he quickly confessed to the shootings and stated that he would plead guilty. When police asked what his motivation for the killing spree was, he said that his former neighbor, Sam Carr, had a dog that was possessed by a demon, which told Berkowitz to kill. Sam Carr is the same Sam that inspired his nickname, the Son of Sam. So we're going to go deeper into that. And I just want to jump back. Again, I haven't had time to really reach out to other creators and people affected by this case, but I will tell you, I got a chance to see a video with regards to the apartment. And please let me not get this wrong. It's Manny Grossman. And he's got tons of videos. If you want to jump down rabbit holes, go check him out. He goes deep. He takes it, he took what rabbit holes he wanted to jump down with what Maury Terry provided us with, and he's gone. He's gone. So he's got some great videos out. Check him out. But one of the things that I found very interesting that I hadn't heard until I started diving a little deeper into this case was that his dad knew, or a friend's dad was a fireman that had been in Berkowitz's apartment a few nights earlier, and the apartment was in pristine condition. It was clean. Like, this could have been all staged. I don't want to go too deep into that, but check his video out. But interesting. Okay, Berkowitz was sentenced to 25 years in prison for each murder, served in New York's Supermax prison, Attica Correctional Facility. He started his prison sentence in Attica, and it was in Attica that if you watch him in any of the videos, they sliced his neck, and he's got a thick, even now, he's 68 years old, you could still see that scar. He talks about that in one of his interviews too. He never pursued or followed up with it. He took the slice, he got stitched up, and he moved on with his life. So he served in Attica Correctional Facility, and then in February 79, he held a press conference and stated that his claims about demonic possession were a hoax. So initially he's talking about the dog, and he was possessed by demons, and the dog told him to kill, and he's saying that that was a hoax. And that was the news back in the late 70s, that the demon dog was telling him to go out and do these shootings, which now you look back at it and you're like, so stupid. But there are still some out there that are of that narrative, and I'm not trying to disrespect. I'm just saying I disagree. We're all entitled to our own opinion, and I always thought it was just too crazy. Too crazy, but people are crazy sometimes, yeah? Anyhow, so he dismissed that. He said it was a hoax. And then Berkowitz stated to a court-appointed psychiatrist that he was lashing out in anger against a world that he felt had rejected him. I think that's very exaggerated. I definitely think he had problems. I am definitely with the belief that he had mental issues. He had problems growing up, but his environment as a youth, and go back to part one, I don't want to reiterate that, but I do believe he had problems, but there's so much more, okay? There's so much more. So some people say, now, he didn't have anything. He was slick as they come, and maybe that's true, but my opinion is he totally had mental illness, and he definitely had issues growing up, and they definitely had some impact on this case and what was to occur. So where did we leave off here? Okay, so he felt that he had been particularly rejected by women, which could be one of the reasons that he specifically targeted attracted women. Again, we're kind of dismissing that. Maybe. He says no now, but maybe. In 1990, Berkowitz was moved to Sullivan Correctional Facility. Today, he's 68, and he's in Shawangunk Correctional Facility in Hudson Valley, where he will spend the rest of his life. He has had a few parole hearings, and by his own words, he has told them that he is where he is, and he feels that he is where he belongs. So at this point, could he be paroled? Can he get out? Does he want to get out? He was arrested at 24? He's been institutionalized for almost all of his life. What is out here for him? We will talk later. If you've watched any of his interviews, you'll know that he is born-again Christian now, and he acts in a pastor-type capacity in the prison. He writes, and he tries to inspire. He calls himself the Son of Hope, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I hope that this was helpful. Again, I recognize that there is so much out there. The purpose of the first video and this video were just to give you basic facts as they occurred in the original narrative, a little bit of commentary for discussion. So now the next part of this series will be shorter study segments, and I hope that you will participate in that via chat, via comment, via email. We have a Facebook page, Cracklin' Rosie True Crime, where there's a little more access there. You can message me, you could post on the board, we could share archives and ideas. But thank you for listening, thank you for tuning in. I hope it was helpful. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. I'm promising that as the study videos come out, they will get pretty intense, and there'll be a little more controversial information discussed. But remember, as long as it's respectful, we are all entitled to our own opinion, and feel free to share what you want as long as it's respectful. So thank you, have a great day, and tune back in with me, Cracklin' Rosie True Crime.